Alrighty, folks. So this is going to be a little bit of a teaser. I apologize, but we're going to try and keep these videos to under 4 hours. And you know I can talk. So this is, as promised, a glimpse into the family dynamics of the Trump men. The charts that I have on screen right now are Fred Trump, the father or patriarch, Fred Trump Jr., who is the brother, son that committed suicide, and of course our president, Donald Trump. Now, one of the interesting things about family dynamics is that children, siblings will have very, very different experiences of their parents and their childhoods. Like some things will be the same, but there will be a lot that will just not match up. And sometimes, in some cases, you'll even wonder if they were raised in two completely different families. So, with that said, also parents will have very different relationships with each of the children. And it's not because children are defective in any way. It's just that we are still dealing with people, and not all people get along smoothly or easily. It's very different dynamics from one person to the other. The only difference is that in a parent-child relationship, the dynamics have changed because now there's a power dynamic involved and also a dependency and a whole lot of other developmental issues that come with this particular relationship that make it a lot more complicated than a relationship between two people who were coworkers, for example, or employer-employee, or siblings, or girlfriend and boyfriend, or girlfriend-girlfriend, or boyfriend-boyfriend. You know what I mean? Or platonic friends. It's just a very different, unique, and complicated relationship. And anybody who's ever had kids will definitely agree with that. So, looking at Fred Trump, some of the things that jump out are, one, he's got a Sun-Mercury conjunction with Mercury, Cazimi the Sun. Mercury is in the heart of the Sun. So in the sign of Libra, what this is going to do is a couple of things. One, it's going to make him a master negotiator because Libra is the sign of the merchant, among other things. And the Sun-Mercury conjunction exact with the Mercury in the heart of the Sun like this makes him what would be referred to in old-time slang as a silver-tongued devil. So there would have been a tremendous amount of pride in his ability to negotiate and bargain and communicate and persuade people to do things the way he wanted them to do. And also, most of his identity would have been built around language. So it's interesting when we look at this in his chart to see how this has influenced his children. So with Donald, we see that love of language and that desire to manipulate and persuade people being expressed. This is something that Donald has definitely picked up from his father. Obviously, he expresses it in a bit of a different way, but it's still there. You know the old saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? Now, what I thought was fascinating is if you look at Fred Trump Jr., the son, the deceased son, Fred Trump Jr. also has a Sun-Mercury conjunction in Libra. So in many ways, Fred Trump Jr. and Fred Trump are not only alike in their name, but they're also very similar in their temperament and behavior. So in many ways, especially since this is a parent-child relationship, Fred Trump would have definitely had a propensity to see Fred Trump Jr. as a literal extension of himself. So, the challenge with parents and children is that there is a point when we have to recognize that our children are not mirror images of us. They are separate individual people with separate individual personalities. But in this particular case, it would have been difficult for Fred Trump Sr. to probably have seen that as a possibility and or accepted that. He would have taken great pride in his son. And are also, one of the things that's interesting, when you have a sun-sun conjunction like this, not only do you have a sense of unity or unison where you identify with each other so strongly it's hard to determine where one starts and the other ends. With a sun in men, it also creates a bit of a competition. So there's always this sense of jocular competition in these relationships. So in many ways, Fred Trump Sr. may have also seen his son, Fred Jr., as competition. Now, whether this was healthy competition in that he wanted his son to be as good or better than he was at whatever these things were, or toxic competition where he was literally competing with his son because he refused to let go of his own youth or power. And you'll see this more painfully in mother-daughter relationships where the mother's competing with her daughter and trying to, yeah, you know what I mean? Like those are just very toxic expressions of competition because they don't serve the parent or the child. They actually do a lot of damage to the child and they don't serve the parent. So anyway, so Fred Trump Sr., the other thing that we're looking at with Fred Trump Sr. is who is this man and what is his nature, right? So with Fred Trump Sr., now remember, we don't have a time of birth. So we're going to ignore that and you're just going to ignore these placements. We don't actually know what houses his planets are sitting in because we don't have a time of birth. All we're working with are just the planets, right? So with that said, let's take a look at what we've got. So if we set this up for a noon time, that moon is in Pisces, give or take a few degrees. So the moon may be at 0 Aries, or the moon may be earlier in Pisces. We don't know because we're not completely sure where that moon is. What we do know is that unless that moon is earlier, well, not even then, you can't even use that. Unless that moon is, unless that moon is earlier than 22 degrees, which would only be possible maybe if Fred was born like at midnight. And even then, I don't think so. What this means is that Fred Trump was born with a moon void of course. The moon void of course is a very special condition. We will talk about that in another video. But the moon void of course and in Pisces indicates that he had a very strong, what is the word I'm looking for? He had a very strong imagination. So there's a lot of visionary quality to him. But also he tends to be more isolated. And I got to stop here or we're going to be out here all day talking about this. The other thing that's interesting about Fred Trump's chart is that, look at this, he's got a Mars-Uranus conjunction. That's an N in Capricorn. That is a tough position. One of the reasons this is problematic is that Mars-Uranus conjunction in Capricorn tends to make people very hard-nosed and very volatile. So with a Mars-Uranus conjunction alone, not even looking at the sign, you're looking at somebody who's got a hair-trigger temper. They're extremely impatient. They want everything their way because Mars and Uranus together makes a person very self-propelled. So in terms of business and being an entrepreneur or a maverick, this is the placement you want because you will brook no interference. You will get stuff done. However, in terms of the softer side of relationships, it can make things a little bit more challenging. Now, that Mars-Uranus conjunction at 0 and 2 Capricorn, let me see what it's doing across the charts for these boys. It is squaring, look at this, it is squaring Donald's Neptune. So with a Mars-Uranus conjunction squaring his son's Neptune, this means that, because the Neptune is where you're vulnerable, right? So Saturn's where it hurts, and Neptune is where you're soft. It's like a big, because it's a Neptune, it's Pisces, it's a very vulnerable place. It's a very deep, sensitive part of yourself. And with Mars squaring that explosive temper, that self-determination, that abrasiveness that was so classically Fred Trump Sr., would have run roughshod on little Donald when he was younger. Now remember, Donald also carries the moon in square to his natal Neptune. So he's got this Mercury Neptune square here. That means that this Mars-Uranus conjunction, bring a space here. This Mars-Uranus conjunction for Fred Sr. would have set up a T-square to Donald's Neptune. No, gotta move this around. Sorry. So Donald's Mercury would have been opposing his father's Mars-Uranus, right? And Donald's Neptune, which squares his Mercury, would have set up a T-square in this chart between them. Now, in matters of personal relationships, this is going to be extremely problematic because this Mercury Neptune loves to lie. They love bending the truth. Um, it's good for a lot of things. It's also bad for a lot of things. The problem is this Mars Uranus is going to get activated every time that Mercury Neptune square kicks in. So every time this one starts to manipulate facts and stretch the truth a little bit and is late, he would have been chronically late for everything. And excuses, oh my God, he would have had an excuse for everything with this combination. That would have set Fred Sr. off, and that's when that ugly, abrasive, explosive Mars-Uranus conjunction would have kicked in. So Fred Sr. would not have tolerated any of that stuff, which also means that in practice, somebody with this particular configuration, right, this Mercury Neptune square, and it makes sense when you think about it. Somebody with this aspect that grew up in that type of environment where this was constantly, literally being held in front of a firing squad every time it was doing what it shouldn't be doing, okay, they would have, as a survival mechanism, gotten very, very good at being better at the very things that were getting them in trouble. Which means when you have people, and you'll see this in people sometimes when they're chronic liars, and extremely irresponsible. Um, if they grew up in environments where they were constantly being taken to task on that, if it's part of their nature, they don't change. They remain who they are. They just become much more skilled and sophisticated in how they deliver that information. So it's harder to catch them at it. And we see a lot of that with the verbal dancing that Donald does now. Uh, But if he grew up with an extremely in-your-face, abrasive, explosive father, he's not going to not do that unless someone is equally or more forceful and abrasive and, quite frankly, frightening than his father was when he was growing up. And good luck with that, because there's no adult on the planet that's going to go near the president and explode in his face and hand him back his, excuse my language, ass. Um, at this point, it's just not going to happen. So, he does what he does and he figures it's okay because, listen, if you're not as horrible as my dad was, then I must be doing something right. Now, with Fred Sr., let me get this out of here. So we know that and also too, just so you guys know, we don't have the time of birth of Fred Jr. either. So we don't use his houses either, just the planets. There we go. Okay. So with Fred Jr. and Fred Sr., so we know that Fred Sr. would have seen Fred Jr. as an extension of himself. What's also interesting, remember, this is just an abrasive, hot-headed, oh my God, this is like a hair trigger hand grenade all the time, right? So here's what's interesting. If you look at Fred Jr., look at this. He's got a Mars-Neptune conjunction. This child was so sensitive, and he was poetic, and he was gifted, and he was kind and musical, and it's in Virgo, the very refined, delicate sign of Virgo. So not only did he have an extremely delicate constitution that really, Mars-Neptune conjunction people have a hard time in the normal world anyway. Mars and Virgo people tend to be very high strung. When you've got a Mars-Neptune conjunction in Virgo like this, and with a Sun-Mercury conjunction in Libra on top of it, what you have is somebody who's actually very refined and very emotionally sophisticated and very delicate in a lot of ways. They're not built or wired for rough and tumble vulgarity and coarseness that is the world around us. So being in the world is challenging for them on a lot of levels. These are the people who are designed to be architects and musicians, artists and poets and thinkers, and all the aesthetically beautiful up, evolved sort of stuff that only comes in a very civilized society. And this is who he was. Now, there are a lot of people who say, oh, well, Mars Neptune, of course, he was an alcoholic. Well, listen, if you were constantly under psychic assault by what you saw as literally a world full of wildebeest and orangutans, and you're a little delicate lily in the field with all the strength and protection of one, you would want to quiet your jangled nerves too. It'd be very difficult for you to get through the day without wanting to numb yourself, to subdue some of the assault that you're constantly under just being around people. So that's where a lot of this Neptune thing comes in. And Neptune is a lot more complicated, and we'll get into that in a separate video as well. But for now, understand that with this poor boy, with this combination right here, that Sun-Mercury conjunction in Libra, that Mars-Neptune conjunction in Virgo, this is somebody who was very, very sensitive and had very highly refined aesthetic senses and would have, no matter what, had a very difficult time dealing with rough and tumble things. Now, one of the things that we do know is that according to the biographies, Fred Jr. was very active and very, Ernest Hemingway, very manly man off having all sorts of adventures and, was a pilot and a sailor and, you name it, he was off doing it. And we're going to see that right there with his Venus in Sag. So Venus in Sag loves adventures, but more importantly, Venus in Sagittarius loves expanding their horizons and seeing what's out there. They love foreign and exotic places and people because it offers them an opportunity to see more of the world and to expand their understanding of it. And also, in particular, with this right here and this, he would have needed lots of breathing room. And one of the things you'll notice in a lot of his activities, they involved open spaces. Pilots, open sky. There are no traffic jams in the air. Well, not yet anyway. Out on the ocean, miles and miles of solitude and room to breathe and think. These are the things that would have appealed to him. The very aggressive nature and daredevil nature of these things would have been clearly influenced by his father's Mars-Uranus in Capricorn. This particular gentleman, he's a very coarse, rough around the edges, like, we don't raise no sissies in this house, like that kind of a personality. So in order for Fred Jr. to have gotten any peace and any level of acceptance from his father without derision, it would have had to have been pursuing these things that satisfied this need for beauty and solitude and space and breathing room and refinement, that sophisticated kind of balance of just kind of being out there and away from the rough and tumble vulgarity of the world with this. And that's where that would have come from. If he had had a different type of parent who was less overbearing, and believe me, honey, that's overbearing. He probably would have gone on to be a brilliant musician or architect or artist. But sadly, we're never going to know. We're just never going to know, which is really unfortunate. Okay, now, other things that are interesting between these charts. So here's the other thing with Fred and his dad, Fred, right? So look at this. In Fred Sr.'s chart, he's got that cranky old Saturn retrograde in Aquarius, right? And it's in the South Node. Fred was here to do a lot of stuff that he's done before, so he's finishing up some stuff in this lifetime. But the most important thing I want you guys to look at, right, is look where that sits on his son's chart. That Saturn conjuncts Fred Jr.'s Jupiter. So Jupiter is our reward system. It's also where we go when we need inspiration and uplifting and we want to get stuff done, and it's the thing that drives us forward in the future, right? Now, Fred Jr. already has his Jupiter retrograde, so he's already very sensitive about that stuff. And Jupiter in Aquarius likes groups and loves humanity, but has trouble fitting in. So they always feel a little off step with everybody. And also, they tend to be overly idealistic. So a big challenge for Fred would have been literally finding the balance between his idealism and the realities of the people around him, what he expected from them and with them, and who he was actually dealing with. So there was always that going on. And also, with that Jupiter retrograde, he has to make his own luck. Nothing comes easy for him. So even though he came from a position of wealth, and advantage, privilege, a position of privilege. In many ways, in his particular lifetime, this would have actually worked as a handicap for him. Too many to get into now. It's all speculation at this point, but just know that for many people, um, especially when you're talking about extreme wealth, on the outside for people who don't have that kind of money, it looks like it's a great life because there's so few things you have to worry about. But remember, the important things about life are our relationships, and your relationships change dramatically when you're the person who has the gatekeeper to this much wealth and resources. So uh, the people that you can trust and the people you're surrounded by are not, it's not the same thing. They don't have the same tests that people go through on a daily basis to prove their character that poor people do. Like, poor people have no time for nonsense. So you screw up, buddy. Like, everybody knows about it and everybody's going to talk about it because we got no time for that. But in more affluent circles, it's a little bit different. So that Jupiter, for him, retrograde means that he, no matter what, he had to make his own luck and he had to work very, very hard to establish himself. Um, so there was always that sense there. But he was also, because it set up this beautiful grand trine in his chart with his moon and his sun Mercury, he was also up for that challenge. So he looked for opportunities to go out and prove himself, because he needed that. He needed to see that for himself. So that's good. We like that. However, right? This mean old Saturn here, Mr. Funbags, is sitting on that Jupiter. When your Saturn sits on somebody else's Jupiter, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you can be the grounding force that keeps their feet to the ground so they don't float away on those great big visions and dreams they have. Like, you are the force of realism, the voice of reason, and the force of realism in their life. That's one possible manifestation of it. The other manifestation is that you could be a big wet blanket on your dreams all the time, right? So you know those people who think they're being realistic when really they're just being negative and pissing all over your dreams and your hopes and your aspirations and just really making you wonder why you got out of bed, much less answer the phone to talk to them? Yeah, that's what Saturn does when it's sitting on your Jupiter. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that along with this, right, now Fred Senior Saturn trines his Pluto. Okay, so this gives it some support, makes it a little easier to deal with. Now, remember, Fred Jr. has this grand trine going on, right? Well, look at this. Fred Jr.'s moon is somewhere in Gemini. Remember, we don't have a time of birth, so just like his father, that moon can move back and forth a few degrees, right? So it may be in earlier Gemini, or it may actually be all the way over in Cancer. We're not completely sure because we don't really know what time he was born. But either way, that Pluto, Fred Sr.'s Pluto, is sitting very close to that. All right, so now Fred Sr.'s Saturn and Pluto is sitting right here on Fred Jr.'s Jupiter moon. All right, so Saturn on Jupiter, we already talked about that. This Pluto right here, sitting on Fred Jr.'s moon, that's a very controlling aspect. So with Pluto on the moon like that, Fred Sr. would have had a very difficult time letting Fred Jr. have a life separate from one that he approved of. We'll put it that way. Because Pluto doesn't play fair, and Pluto on the moon tends to make for an almost symbiotic type of connection or dependency on each other. And again, this could have been good or bad, but in a parent-child relationship, this gets more complicated because it's already hard enough for parents and children to see each other as separate, distinct adult human beings. Like, that's a process we all have to go through. It doesn't come easily. But it's necessary for our mental health and our ability to grow into the adults we need to be. The problem with this Moon-Pluto conjunction here is that that makes that process even harder to do, right? Because they both represent deep unconscious processes. And this is even if Fred Jr.'s moon moves just a little bit, because that Pluto is still very close to it. But I'm going to guess that Fred's moon is really right there. Now, with that said, also too, look at this. Fred Sr.'s moon is in Pisces, squaring Fred Jr.'s moon, right? Now, both of these moons could move back and forth a couple of degrees, so it could change things. So the thing to remember is they're still close enough that this is a consideration between the charts, even without knowing the time of birth. And more importantly, the closer this aspect gets, the more we're going to feel it, right? So with that moon in Pisces squaring the moon in Gemini, they would have had a difficult time living together. So there would always be this sense of discomfort around each other, like not that you couldn't trust each other, but the other person never really kind of felt like they were in sync with you, like they're always working at cross purposes with you. This is made more problematic if Fred Jr. as well as Fred Sr. both have a void of course moon in their respective signs. And that would have just made things even worse or more complicated as far as living together. And again, void of course moons, they're their own adventure, and we'll talk about that in another thing. Just suffice it to say that a moon-moon square makes it very, very difficult for people to cohabitate the same space. The problem is they are father and son, so where else is he going to go? So Fred Sr.'s Saturn on Junior's Jupiter and Fred Sr.'s Pluto on Junior's moon can mean that in his lifetime, Fred Jr. experienced his father as a very oppressive force. And one that not stunted his growth, but certainly prevented his ability to move forward in his life and go be his own person, or at least that's how he may have interpreted it. And this would have created other challenges as well. And also remember, approval would have been a big deal. So Saturn on that Jupiter right there, and then Pluto here on this moon, which is a very controlling Fred Trump, and also this Sun, Mercury conjunction, this extension of who I am. Fred Trump Sr. would have probably had an extremely difficult time letting Fred Jr. have a life or an identity that was not something he personally approved of, because he refused to let Jr. be anything but an extension of himself. Okay, now, so let's move on to the Donald, right? So now, Donald is very good about painting a rosy picture of his childhood with his father, but that is not what his chart says. And it's not uncommon for people to put together a Norman Rockwell image of their childhood for public relations purposes. So with Donald, we have a full moon chart. Depending on what time of birth you use, he's either got the sun moon up, this full moon, either intercepted or not intercepted. So I have it set up for 29 Leo rising. I still think it's 2 Virgo rising. Either way, we've got a full moon sitting here in the 4th and 10th house. So this would have, full moon people are very special. I'm just going to put it like that. And I believe he was born under an eclipse, but I have to double check that. But here's the thing I want you guys to look at, right? Look at this. He has a Venus-Saturn conjunction in Cancer. This is somebody who grew up feeling like that nothing they did was ever right. They never felt emotionally secure. They never felt emotionally safe, which, given this, we're not the least bit surprised about. Nobody's going to feel safe around that man. And also with the Venus-Saturn conjunction in Cancer in the 11th house, right? This also means that for him, there would have been things that were taught to him very early on about love and who you give love to and preferential treatment of people and the deserving. So everything in his life was about who's deserving of love and affection. Do you deserve it? So unconditional love was never an option in his childhood, and also because he's got some other problematic things in his chart and difficult relationships with his father. Remember, we've got that Mercury-Neptune square in here that would have, that would have set his father off constantly. This would have made it extremely important for him to be extremely sophisticated in how he manipulated information to try and gain affection from the father. Okay? Now, there's that. He has a Sun-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. He's not responsible. He's never been responsible. This is short attention span theater here. Okay. Now, the thing about it is, if you look at this. Fred Senior's Pluto, while it is on Junior's moon, here it's on Donald's sun opposing his moon. So Donald is feeling the brunt of this Pluto deeply, deeply, right? And remember, Pluto is a very controlling planet. So Pluto here on his sun would have meant that all of his father's deepest unconscious and irrational biases about the world would have played a significant role and shaped the way that Donald sees the world, right? Because Pluto's very heavy-handed. The other thing is that Pluto on the sun is very controlling. But with Pluto on the sun, it would have been very conscious and very out in the open and very, very specific. So Fred Sr. would have been very, very instrumental in trying to manicure and rein in. That's the feeling you would get with these two charts. Rein in his sun. Now, remember that this Pluto trines the Saturn in Fred Sr.'s chart, right? So let's look at the other end of this. So what is Fred Sr.'s Saturn doing in Donald's chart? Well, guess what? Saturn is on Donald's part of fortune, right? But more important, it's opposing his Saturn. So Saturn would have played the heavy, right? Every single time. Saturn would have put the big kibosh on everything that looked like initiative on Donald's part. Because again, Pluto's controlling, it's on his sun, and this one is going to have everything to say about what this one is allowed to do. Because that is the nature of Pluto. It's a very challenging aspect to have between charts. Now, this could be good or this could be bad. Unfortunately, in this particular case, with Saturn opposing Mars, right? And then this, or not that, sorry, this, right, interacting with that Mercury-Neptune, right? This is just not a great picture. So what we're showing now is a picture of somebody who had a very controlling father, who disapproved of things that he did that in Donald's mind, he saw as taking initiative. In his father's mind, he would have seen it as attention-seeking. He would have also been wildly set off, or had his explosive, short hair trigger temper buttons pushed every time Donald pulled that Mercury-Neptune crap and played with the truth, or didn't take responsibility for something, or tried to lie his way out of stuff. Or was late. It would have been being on time for things would have been the big thing, right? Because Fred Sr. would have seen that Mercury-Neptune, as weakness. And Fred Sr. is not trying to hear about weakness in either of his sons. Okay, not here, because he thinks his son is gay and he doesn't want to own it. And there's a very distinct possibility that the junior may have been bisexual, gay or bisexual, and that may be why the heavy drinking. And he certainly doesn't want to hear about it from here, where you're basically like weak because you've got a 12th house Mars and everything you do is very passive aggressive, whiny baby sort of stuff. So Fred would have been tough. And also because the contacts between these charts, think about this for a second. The contacts between Fred Sr.'s chart and Donald and Fred Jr., it's Pluto, it's Saturn, it's Mars-Uranus, right? And even here, with that Sun-Mercury conjunction, while it's favorable for Junior, looks what it's doing to Donald's chart. It sets up a square to that Venus-Saturn conjunction, right? So on the one hand, it's here. It's conjuncting Donald's Jupiter in his second house, right? And now we know, it all came out in the open, that Fred Sr. was responsible for financing or bankrolling basically Donald's entire life. That's this Sun-Mercury conjuncting Donald's Jupiter. That's the Jupiter activation in the second house by this conjunction. However, at the same time, This square to Venus and Saturn, everything that Fred Sr. was, and how he conducted his life and how he conducted his business and all sort of stuff, all of that contributed to deeper insecurity on Donald's part. So all this thing about conditional love and, you know, love has to be earned and who's worthy and who's not and all sort of stuff. These are the messages that Donald would have taken internally, and not in the best way. So where Donald would have needed more emotional support because of this Venus-Saturn conjunction, Fred Sr. would not have been able to give it to him, because everything that Fred does and the way he sees things and his desire to keep things in focus, keep things balanced, would have been disruptive and detrimental for Donald. All right. Okay, so there's more, but we're at 35 minutes now, so I'm going to leave this here. And this is how you look at relationship charts between families. There will be more on the Patreon page. Give me a couple of days. It will be there for subscribers. So for those of you who are not subscribers, I don't know what to tell you, except hang around and look for more videos on YouTube. All right, talk to you later. Bye.